Welcome to Transformative Talks, an intentional wellness podcast dedicated to education, enlightenment, and empowerment through meaningful connection. Through thoughtful conversations with fellow wellness and holistic practitioners, we explore the many pathways to well-being. Each episode is designed to expand understanding, spark curiosity, and offer practical insights you can integrate into your everyday life. Our intention is to inspire your own positive transformation and support you in creating a more empowered life. Hello, and welcome back to Transformative Talks. I'm your host, Chelsey Gilbert, and today we're diving into astrology as part of our Energetic Experience series. Today I'm joined by Tori Newburn, an intuitive author, energy guide, and True Sky Astrologer with a beautiful background in yoga and retreat facilitation. I actually connected with Tori through an event that she led in the space that I have my practice and experience some of what she offers. So if you know anything about me, you know I'm really big into astrology. So there's not going to be a lack of topics during this conversation. Tori, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here and to just share what I can and bring some insight in for your listeners.
Absolutely. So I typically always start out by asking my guests background, how you got started. You're kind of big into intuitive practices. So do you feel like you've always been connected to that part of yourself?
It's a great question, and it's something that I've thought a lot about. I actually talk about it in my book, The Weaver and the Welder, a memoir of sacred musings. And I do believe that I've always been intuitive, but I don't know that I've always had the language around it. So as I was growing up as a little kid, I would worry a lot, or I would like anticipate things happening. And it was put into kind of the bucket of you're overthinking, you're too concerned. But now that I know what intuition is and what it feels like and how it drops into the field, what I'm able to go back and kind of reclaim from my younger self is that I was actually just pulling in intuitive information, even at a very young age. And so I can look at it now and say that I think that I've always been intuitive. I do have some anchor points in my timeline where I feel like my intuition came online in an even stronger way. And it connects to moments where I was really doing deep meditation, deeper practices of yoga, times in my life where I was opening my channel, opening my energy into the other realms intentionally. And in that, the intuition crystallized. It became more clear, and I was able to really start to work with it in a way that was intentional.
Yeah, and I noticed too when we're younger, we don't have those systems in place in our brain that block that intuition. There's such a natural flow.
Yeah, I think it also comes out a lot as like imagination. So I had a huge imagination as a kid, and actually kind of guided me towards my studies in art. That's what my educational background is in. And I think all of that now in hindsight, with the language that I have, the experience that I have, all of that was an intuitive channel that was just starting to present itself in other ways. But I used to be little where I just like lay on the backyard and stare up at the trees and do things that felt really soothing to me, but maybe were more of that intuitive sense.
Yeah, so you could probably see or feel the connection between creative energy and intuition as well.
Absolutely. And I think there's a lot of information out there right now about how creative ideas drop in, they kind of choose you, and you become the conduit through which those ideas come into the world. You have writers talking about this, you have artists, you have people who are really focused on this connection between the field, the shared field of consciousness, and then the creatives being the conduit for those ideas to come into the manifested world. So I 100% agree that intuition and creativity absolutely are woven together.
Yeah, it reminds me of this TED Talk I watched. Alex Gray, he's an artist, and he was talking about how creativity and consciousness are one thing. And he kind of goes down this whole rabbit hole of how art really informs, as you mentioned, like the collective consciousness, and how if you go backwards in time and kind of look at the progression of art, and the role that it's played, like how that's reflective of us as a whole and as a species. And if I can find it, I'll link it down at the bottom of the show notes because it's a really, really good introspective talk from him.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too, because as you bring that up, we have most of our ancient histories are coming from imagery, like in Egypt or in other archaeological digs, where the imagery is what's telling the story. And while that's maybe more artifact or intentional creation, it is what then is our connection to images and creation here in our contemporary world. And we use them differently, but I think that imagery has always been a way to connect into the higher realms, and way back into our ancient human history, we've been using images to communicate.
So, when did your intuitive side or your curiosity around these things shift from they just existed within you
Mm.
to where you shifted your career path towards being able to dive into that and help people in that way?
Such a great question. So, in the years of 2009 to 2011, I was in DC doing my master's studies in art. And I was simultaneously doing a yoga teacher training and really deepening my meditation practice. And so it was around that time that a lot of energy portals in my field were just starting to open up. So I've always been a dreamer, but my dreams started being massively informative. I would say that even some of them were precognitive. I had an astrology reading at that time where she kind of told me what was going to happen in my life, and I was very skeptical. So it was in that 2012 time period that I was completing my master's work in art. And I started intentionally and actively teaching yoga and meditation, that it all started to weave together. And I started to be able to offer meditation classes, yoga classes. And it was in those spaces that my intuition just started pouring through. And I would be teaching and I would be saying something and I'd be like, I have no idea where this is coming from. But it would drop down and in, and I was open to receive it and to share it and be a conduit for that intuitive energy and information. And inevitably, after every class, a student would come up and say, oh my gosh, you said the exact thing I needed to hear. So this consistency of feedback from students really started to pique my interest. And I think that was really the moment where I was able to say, there's something bigger happening here. Like there's information coming through me that I don't own it. It's not mine. It's not like egoically Tori's information that she's sharing. Something else was coming through the field in a very active way. So from 2012 forward, my yoga teaching career really took off, and I was teaching multiple classes a week, everything from simple flow vinyasa to continuing education teacher trainings and retreats. And it was in those very formative years of that part of my career that I started to open up to being a vessel through which information would flow. And it was in 2018 that I opened my business This Gentle Way. And it's lived as a very small, like hobby business for a long time. But it was in those sessions one-on-one with clients that I would just let myself open and receive and share what was coming through. And anyone who has been a client of mine will know that I'll say, I don't know where this is coming from exactly, but it feels like it's really important for you to hear it. And that was the place where I started getting the validation and the affirmation. Because similar to those early days of teaching yoga, where a student would come up and say, oh, you said the exact thing I needed to hear. It started to happen that I would pull through details of things that there's no way that I could have known. It had to come from somewhere else. And that mirrored my very first experience with the astrologer back in 2012, where she was saying things to me that there's really no way that she could have known. And then all of a sudden I was doing this on the other side of the conversation where I was the one pulling through information. And at that point, I couldn't be skeptical anymore. There was just too much validation that this is true. This is real. This information is coming from somewhere. And I'm just the vessel through which it is flowing. And I felt really honored to hold that space. And so I think that that shift was important too, that I was open to receive it. I held it with a very sacred energy, and that became a very ceremonial, reciprocal relationship between me and the intuitive information. And that really started to peak back in 20. And here we are in, what is it, 2026? So for almost 6 years, I've been really just open to whatever is flowing through.
As you're describing that, it makes me think of channeling, basically. I know there's some people that teach channeling, teach different techniques, teach different meditations. But from what it's sounding like, it's like you kind of already had that natural ability to do that, and just over the years you've honed it a little bit.
Yeah, and I love the way that you say that. I will tell people, and I genuinely believe this, I think we all have the ability. I actually think that children are very intuitive. And so I think that everyone comes in fully primed with the full capacity to connect to the other realms, higher dimensions, the shared field of consciousness, whatever you want to call it. But we're taught to shut it off rather than taught how to nurture it. And so part of my healing journey has been to say, this isn't about learning something new. This is about unlearning certain processes that I've been taught and letting those go so that I can lean into a trusting relationship with that which is inherent in all of us anyway. And I mean, I definitely agree that there are ways of doing it more intentionally, like the people who teach people how to channel and all of that. And I think that there are protocols that you can lean into. But I get really sad when people are saying, oh, like they can do it and I can't. Because I genuinely believe that everyone has the capacity. It's just about going into that more innate aspect of ourselves that we've forgotten, reclaiming that, bringing it back online, and creating a trusted relationship with that more core essence part of ourselves.
Yeah, I agree. I always have looked at it like you have people that are born just more naturally inclined to certain things. Like some people are really good at math. There's some people are naturally athletic. You're not naturally inclined to it, you can practice. You just have to put a little bit more effort into it. But it definitely doesn't mean that you're not capable of doing it. And also with the intuitive aspect and connecting with yourself and the universe in that way, we're not taught that in school like we are taught all the other, English and math and history and things like that, where we all kind of have that base knowledge and that base connection with it. So we just kind of start off debilitated a little bit.
It's interesting that you bring that up because there's actually in the alternative education space a lot of programs that are coming up now that are encouraging kids to connect to the intuitive side. So I saw there's a school program, I think it was in Singapore, where they actually are encouraging kids to work on their telepathy and their remote viewing site, and in a really simple way. They're in a classroom, they put on a blindfold, and the teacher writes a word on the board, and they're asked to try to figure out what the word is on the board. And what they're finding in a very quantifiable way is that most kids can do this. It's like practicing the piano or the violin. The more you practice it, the more the biological neural synapses are strengthened, but also a lot of this information exists in the field around us. So it's about learning how to turn your body into more of a receiver and be able to tap into the quantum field, the shared field of consciousness, to know that a lot of the information that we're trying to access is not in our brain, it's beyond the body. And that also is being quantifiably researched, which is just so cool because the ancients have said it forever. And now we have modern science proving that it's true and that really our bodies are divine, immaculate vessels that are designed to be a receiver of information. And that when we step into that power, it's really when things upgrade.
It's basically a tool for empowerment and a tool. Yeah. There's a whole rabbit hole we could go down of why that's suppressed in people. But speaking of tools for empowerment, astrology is something that I personally tapped into when I was a teenager. And I've studied on and off for about 25 years now. But I really dove into it, and I do more Western astrology, but I really dove into it probably the past 2 years. And I'm at a point, and honestly, I feel like I'm just scratching the surface. There's so much to it. There's so many layers and so many components and so many ways you can look at things. So let's talk a little bit about your journey into astrology and the type of astrology that you do.
Yeah, well, it's awesome because it's again changing the narrative and realigning the focus. So the astrology that I offer and read for people is called True Sky Astrology, which means that we are shifting our awareness of the sky to be more astronomically accurate, meaning that we're looking at the actual placement of the sun, the moon, the planets as it relates to the true constellations. Now, people who have just a kind of surface level understanding of astrology don't really realize that Western astrology is a fixed system that no longer relates to the actual sky. And often the follow-up question is, does it matter? And I say to people, it just is a different way. It's just a different perspective. For me, if I'm going to claim the energy of the sun being in a particular constellation, I feel as though it's important to know what the actual constellation is. And so when I started astrology, similar to you, growing up, I would look at my horoscope. I knew the dates that were associated with the zodiac signs, and it was really kind of more of a fun hobby thing. Fast forward to that time that I've referenced, that kind of 2012 time period, where I had my first official astrology reading. It just blew me open in the most beautiful way. And I decided at that point that I was going to learn as much as I could about it. That was from the traditional astrology perspective. So my original training was actually in Western astrology. And that's what I read, and that's what I referenced for a very long time. I used to teach yoga to the cycle of the moon, and I would reference the traditional Western dates as determined by the ephemeris and the kind of fixed system that many people follow. What happened in 2020 is that I was working with a woman out of Canada, and kind of at the same time that I was working with her, we both happened upon the access to sidereal astrology, which now many people call True Sky Astrology. And it was through my work with her that she was really helpful in translating how to release the identities and the archetypal patterns that I had associated with Western astrology and be able to open to this new lens, this more accurate lens. And I liken it to saying, like, once you see something, you can't unsee it. So once I saw that the traditional Western system was not aligned with the actual sky, it was hard for me to then be like, well, the full moon is in this constellation, when if you just look up at the sky, you see that the full moon is in a completely different constellation. And since many people track the full moon, new moon, and do rituals or gatherings around those times, it was something that I really started to tune into. So for me, it became this moment of choosing between the two systems. Am I going to stick with a system that I've studied and I've learned and I've taught for a really long time? Or am I going to step into evolution, transformation, and opening to a new system that feels, for me, in much higher alignment? And since I teach evolution and transformation, it felt like a really good moment to like walk the walk, talk the talk, and to say, I can do this. I can start to look at something differently. And in switching into True Sky Astrology, I started to feel a deeper resonance with the light codes, deeper resonance with the patterns of the sky. It actually encouraged me to learn the constellations, to look up to the stars, to figure out, astronomically speaking, like how they all are put together. And once you start that education process, the cosmos open up in a way that it's just profound. You just really cannot be in a relationship with the sky in that specific of a way and not be inspired. Whereas when I was reading traditional Western astrology, it was like I was looking down at books, I was researching things on the internet. I was not looking at the sky. And then shifting into creating a personal relationship with the stars, the constellations, the actual movement, it became a living, breathing, organic system. And it is now something that I use every single day. I look up to the sky. I use my little app on my phone to be like, where is the sun actually? Where are the placements of the planets? And you build out an understanding of the patterns, of the systems, of the orbits. And also, you develop the relationship that all of this is just from the perspective of Earth. That if I was on another planet looking at our solar system, it would look totally different. And so astrology became something really personal to me that related to the actual real and living sky. And it was this amazing upgrade that I was able to receive and start to integrate. And I think it becomes an extremely powerful system to engage with True Sky because you can overlay the history and the depth and the oral tradition of interpretation from traditional Western astrology, but bring it into the contemporary lens of the actual placements. And then it just weaves itself into something extremely powerful.
When you were talking about developing this actual connection with looking up
Mhm.
and connecting with the sky in that way, it just reminded me of in ancient time, our ancestors, that's how they did it.
Yes.
So it just feels like there's that a very deep primal
Yeah.
and intuitive connection
Mm.
in that way, just instinctively looking up and going, hey, there's something up here.
True Sky sidereal way of looking at it, it pulls in the ancient relationship that we've had with the sky since our original curious minds in our original human forms, right? Like we were looking up, we didn't have as much light pollution. We use the sky to determine planting patterns and agriculture. And there's amazing history of astronomical data that dates all the way back to the Sumerians. And it's just mind blowing when you think about the thousands of years that humans have been engaging with the stars. And then you look at the past 100 years of astrology. And we shifted from like looking at the stars and being curious to being like, well, it's in a book and I'm just going to look at the book. And then when the internet came on, it's like, I'm just going to Google, like, where is the moon today? And not actually look at the sky. And I think we lost so much in that. And so a big word that I use is reclamation. We're reclaiming that relationship. And so it is ancient, but it is also the future of how we can use our current technology to connect back to the living sky. I was just on a road trip and we were in dark sky areas, which there aren't very many left, but there are a few. And when you get out to dark skies and you look up at like what would have been more similar to what our ancestors were looking at. I mean, it's breathtaking. I like get chills thinking about it. It is so beautiful to look to the actual sky, to see the stars, to see the constellations. It makes total sense why they would write mythology about them because they are magnetic in their information. And then you go into the whole thing from quantum physics and light theory and electromagnetism, and it like makes sense of why it would impact us. But it's so beautiful, and I could talk about this forever.
Yes, me too. So one thing, and you kind of mentioned this, you were talking about using astrology every day. So what does that look like for you when you say you use astrology every day for yourself?
Yeah, and that's it's actually something I teach in one of my trainings and what I guide students through. Once you create this relationship and you're willing to show up, then it becomes reciprocal. So when I say I use it every day, it means that not only am I looking at my birth chart and I know those kind of core codes that were integrated into me when I was born, I'm using those and referencing the current sky. And so there are multiple different ways that you can do it. You can track the movement of the sun and identify how the movement of the sun overlays with your birth chart. You can look at planetary returns. So, for example, Saturn return is a big one that people talk about, where Saturn returns to the exact part of the sky where it was when you were born. Now, astronomically speaking, all of the planets orbit at a different pace. And based on POV from Earth, sometimes they look like they're going backwards, which is what we call retrograde, which is where Mercury in retrograde comes in as something that people pay attention to. So all of this overlaps. So from the movement of the sun to the moon, you can track that for daily energetics. From the movement of the planets and their planetary returns or the planetary retrogrades, you can overlap that for deeper information. You can also just track the energetic signature of the sky and say, okay, this is what's happening collectively in the current contemporary sky. This is my core code based on my birth chart. And how do those two things overlap? But the most simple way to do it on a daily basis is to just look to where the sun actually is and get a very simple description of what that constellation pulls through and say, okay, in order to be in a higher level, thriving energy during this time of year, I can do my best to integrate and align with the energy of this constellation. Then it becomes this living, breathing, daily interface of how to invite yourself to show up to a higher expression.
And it's a way, I feel, to be aware of the energy. And it's a tool that people can use, especially if maybe you feel like you aren't intuitively inclined.
Yes.
It's a way to kind of tap into that energy in
Yeah.
a way that kind of logically makes sense versus just like, "Oh, I'm getting this download, I don't understand it, and I can't make sense of it." So it's a system basically
Yeah.
to help
And
people.
a lot of astrologers will talk about, and people are like, well, is it made up? Are you making it up? And I, again, like to go back to the ancients. If it was made up, then we wouldn't have been doing it for 8,000 years, right? Like there's history. Well, and even if you look at more of the more ancient archaeological digs, like Göbekli Tepe, like they have astronomical information on these ancient pillars, which I believe is like 10,000 plus years ago, right? So we have information on this planet that has come from the stars for thousands of years. So I don't think we're making it up. What we're invited to do is to create our own relationship with it. And I think as someone who utilizes the sky, who guides people to a relationship with the sky, is that a lot of what we're doing is pattern recognition. And our human brains thrive in pattern recognition, which is why we love to be able to look up to the sky and be like, oh, look, that constellation kind of looks like this. And then we can go back into the history of humanity and say, well, what are the mythologies around this? What other oral traditions talk about this? Where has this story been passed on throughout the generations? You can talk about the constellation of Orion with this perspective for, I mean, thousands of years, people have stories about the constellation of Orion. So if we bring that oral tradition through, we align it with the actual astronomy, and then we can weave it into our own personal relationship of questions that we can ask on a daily basis. Then we start to create a living system of pattern recognition that gives us a daily rhythm and a daily practice to step into that higher energy. So if we track the moon, for example, every couple of days, the moon is in a different constellation. And if you do what I call a lunar daily practice, then you're looking at where the moon is, and each constellation has a core reflective question that you can pull from it. And you can say, for example, we just had the new moon in Pisces. And that core question is, what are my belief systems? What is my soul here to do? And you can spend the 2 days where the moon is in that part of the sky, just reflecting upon those two questions. And if you track it through each month, then every month you have a couple of days with those deeper questions. By the end of the year, you've revisited those questions 12 to 13 times. If you do this over the course of the year, these become integrated inquiries, and it doesn't feel as overwhelming. It leads you to deeper exploration of self and higher connection to the patterns of the sky.
You mentioned that, some people may not believe in astrology or think astrology is just kind of out there. And I've read and seen different things about how higher up business people, millionaires, billionaires have their own astrologers
Mm-hmm.
to do like predictive astrology or
Mm-hmm.
to know when they should make a business deal or to know when they should do a certain thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you have any more knowledge on that maybe you could share.
I think that I was listening to, I listened to a lot of conversations on Gaia Network, GAIA Network. If anyone hasn't heard of that and you're interested in the metaphysical, it's a beautiful platform where there's a lot of information. But there was a conversation that I was listening to where it talks about this idea of, are we seeking answers from a higher level, i.e., astrology, because we need permission? Or are we seeking it because we believe that those answers exist elsewhere, or are we just needing a mirror of reflection? And I think a lot of what I do with astrology is provide that mirror of reflection. I think that astrologers can absolutely be predictive. I know a lot of people who use it for psychic purposes. I think there's a lot of truth to that. And I think a lot of people can use traditional astrology to do that access point. But I don't know if it's the actual astrology or the astrology becomes an access point and then the person starts to channel and intuit the information, because as they access the shared field of consciousness, the quantum field, people will call it the Akashic Records. There's a bunch of different ways that it's been referred to, but this place where all of the information exists and astrology charts become the portal into that information, then the person who is skilled can pull that information through. And so I think that the astrological charts become an access point or a mirror to be able to pull the information through, a portal, if you will. And then in that mirror, the information is reflected to us, and we get to say, do we see ourselves in this? Is this validating my decision? Is this encouraging me to do something, or is it encouraging me to not do something? And how do I feel with that information? I think maintaining personal agency and inner authority as we relate to this information is essential. So I would hope that people who are making decisions based upon astrology are also checking in with themselves and seeing, like, how does this feel? Is this right? Does this feel true to me?
Yeah, that's a really good point. What you're describing too just sounds like it can be used as a divination tool to
Mhm,
connect with,
mhm,
a higher source or something
mhm,
outside. And I also use oracle cards and tarot in my practice as well. And it's very similar to what I tell people is
mhm,
that this is just kind of a reflection or a message of what you need to hear. Whatever resonates with you, take that. That's what you need to be aware of, to be consciously aware of in this moment. So I like that you put that out there, that astrology is not the end all be all of who
yeah.
you are or what's going to happen,
Mhm.
and it's not good to put any sort of, I guess, blind faith into it just because it exists.
I mean, it externalizes the power, and I think that a lot of these practices are encouraging you to come into the inner power. I also say this, like, over and over. I don't like to do predictions because I believe in the theory of timeline, and that in this moment right now, you and I are sharing a timeline that we've consented to show up to this conversation, to be in this place at this time. And like right now, if I were to pull something through for you, it's aligning with this timeline, but timelines shift. This gets very metaphysical and quantum very quickly, but timelines shift. And based on every choice we make throughout every single day, we could be shifting ourselves onto a different timeline. So, like, you and I could be having this conversation right now. And if I were to psychically predict something for you, it would be accurate right now. But then you leave and you turn left instead of right, and something happens and you have to make a decision, and your human free will shifts you onto another timeline. Then the question is, well, was Tori incorrect in her psychic prediction? Or did you shift your energy to another timeline? And that agency of being able to shift to other timelines should be valued, to say, like, you have free will and choice in every moment of every day to do what you're going to do that aligns you to lived experiences. The integration of those lived experiences elevate your soul imprint and your soul code. And there's a lot of that whole conversation we can get into too. But I like to remind people that just because a psychic or a medium or an intuitive told you something on one day doesn't always mean that you're still in alignment with that prediction. So it's not that they were wrong, it's that your timeline and energy has transformed since that conversation.
Yeah, that's really good for people to kind of
Yeah.
be aware of and reflect on if they are, getting intuitive services or getting psychic readings or doing astrology.
And it becomes this really beautiful, again, this word that keeps coming up, but this like really beautiful reclamation of, I was given this information, but I still have every right to determine how I'm going to interface with that information. And that gives you your power back and your inner authority back. And I think that that is a huge part of the human consciousness right now, is finding ways to stand in our power.
Yeah. And one of the things I love about astrology, I love psychology as well. So I'm very big into like the Myers-Briggs test or the Enneagram, like just using those tools for self-reflection. And me personally, is one of the biggest things that I've used astrology for myself.
Yeah.
So I was curious if there are any placements, planets, signs in your own personal chart that you absolutely always go back to and reflect upon and go, this helps me understand different levels of myself.
Yeah. It's a great question. And I think that this is a little bit where Western astrology and True Sky diverge, is in the interpretations of the placements. Again, it's an evolution, right? So there's a big focus in Western astrology of the top three: your sun, your moon, your rising. Most people, if they're into astrology, they can tell you what those things are, right? If you hop over into True Sky, it is very likely that those are going to change in terms of what the constellation is. That is difficult for people. And I have held people in that space for, again, I've been doing this for almost 6 years. It's like, that's a huge moment of recognition of self. And the question is, am I holding on to these archetypes because I've been told that's what I am? Or do these archetypes actually reflect who I am? And if all of this spiritual work is about evolving, transforming, elevating, then why are we so fixated on holding on to archetypal patterns that were given to us a long time ago, right? So the evolution into True Sky Astrology for me, to answer your question, opened up the question of, is it the sun, moon, and rising? Are those the primary placements that we should be looking at? And I do think the sun and the moon are beautiful because we see them, we interface with them. And as I said earlier, part of tracking their true movement is what really opened all of this for me. But when I look at my personal chart, I'm also looking at two aspects called the midheaven, which is unique to each individual based on their birth time, and the north node, which is more of a collective sign because it moves a bit more slowly, as informative points as well. And the way that this is a super simplified version of all of this, so if people want more details, they'll have to talk to me one-on-one. But the high level for all of those, as the way I read them, is that the sun placement is your thriving energy, the moon placement is your internal energy, and the rising, the midheaven, and the north node all work together to create an energetic map. The rising is the guide energy, so kind of this energy that's with you throughout your whole life that you can use as a reference point. The midheaven is the soul's purpose or destination. And that north node placement is your alignment energy, your inner compass, the energy that you can tune into to say, am I on the right track? If I'm not on the right track, let's get realigned with this energy and I can get myself back on the path as determined between my rising and my midheaven. Now, I don't know a lot of other astrologers that would explain it exactly like that, but when I lay this out for people over the course of all these years, that relationship of the rising, the midheaven, and the north node brings a lot of information up for people. And again, it becomes a mirror, a reflection. Maybe I should look at this or think of this differently. But on a daily basis, I like to try to look into, what is my rising sign, my guiding energy? What is my soul's purpose? And am I showing up each day to do that? And if I'm not, then I use the energy of my north node to kind of like get myself back on track. So those are placements that I think people in a deeper exploration of their chart could tune into.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, like I said, I have learned the Western astrology, but in doing the event or meeting you in the event and looking at my True Sky Astrology, it was interesting because as I kind of overlaid the charts, I could see aspects of it that it's like a similar energy carried over into the True Sky. So I try to always remember and kind of hang on to, okay, if it's the same, if it's true in both, that must be kind of like a higher truth for me. And then the idea too of evolution from Western to True Sky.
Yeah.
And that is kind of a hard thing to, if you're so used to one thing. And I just think that's kind of the human brain,
Of
right?
course, we love
Yeah.
things that are familiar. We really don't like things that are unfamiliar.
Yeah.
And yet, if you dive into deeper energetics, those unfamiliar points, those points of resistance are often where we have the deepest growth.
Mhm.
What I say, like, for example, in Western astrology, my sun is in Taurus, and in True Sky Astrology, my sun is still in Taurus. And I remember I'd be like, oh my God, thank God. Like, I can like keep that. Everything else changed. But upon reflection of that change, my moon transferred from Aries into Pisces. And I've always been more of a like internal Pisces, but I had always tried to be an internal Aries. So I was like
Mhm.
trying to fit the archetypal pattern of my Western chart. But I remember being like, well, I'm not like I can get upset, but I'm not that fiery. Like I'm not that intense. I'm much more reflective, soulful, like to be alone, like give me my space when I'm in my internal world. And that's very much the signature of a moon in Pisces. What I say to people though is that if, for example, they're very attached to their sun sign zodiac, and they're like, I really feel like I am this, that likely there are powerful placements in your true sky chart in that constellation. It's just not your sun sign. So, because I read the planetary signatures. So that's Mercury, Venus, Mars, Saturn, Jupiter, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. We even throw in Chiron. That's a lot of other energy up there influencing how you are, who you are, and what you have the potential to become. And so it's not just the sun, the moon, and the rising. And I think that that's a discrepancy that people don't really recognize, that Western astrology, it is just so focused on the big three. But when you broaden the lens and you take into consideration all of the planets and all of the placements and the North Node and the Midheaven and the South Node and all of the other things, it's like this beautiful, detailed picture rather than just these like where your sun is. And it really expands your perspective. But it is wise for you to do the overlay as you transition to say, where are the similarities? Where are the differences? Am I holding on to something because it's a pattern that I really resonate with? Or am I holding on to this because that's what I've always been told I should be? And that's a big question for people. That's
Yeah.
the
And
psychology of it all.
that might be another reason why it makes people uncomfortable, because it does force you to go internally.
Mhm.
And that's just an uncomfortable place for people to
Yeah.
be, reflecting what is my truth? Is this,
Yeah.
why is this true for me?
And I think that growth pattern is something that when you're working with a good guide and you're working with a good mentor or coach, they're able to hold that space for the vulnerability. What I also think is interesting is that astrologers don't always have repeated sessions with clients. They just kind of have like the one reading, and it's like, here's all this information, do with it what you will. For me, it is very important that we have an initial session, we have a follow-up session, and if people are willing and able, we continue working together so that I can help hold the space of integration so that it's not just a deluge of information that you don't know what to do with, but you actually have the space to integrate it.
So let's talk about your book for a little
Yeah.
bit. What's the theme of your book?
Yeah.
What was the purpose when you were writing it?
So my book is entitled The Weaver and the Welder, a memoir of sacred musings. And it is a collection of moments from my life. It's also woven with some of these deep insights and intuitive wisdom. The idea was that I really felt called to share this. We've talked a lot about that intuition, tuning into the channeling, getting those hits from the higher dimensions. It really came to a point where I felt like I had to write this book. Like it had to come out of me. It had to be birthed through me. And I had to figure out a way to weave together the wisdom in a way that anchors it in lived experience. And this is a lot of what I work with clients is using our lived experiences, everything from the like paramount moments of like hiking a mountain to like sitting down and drinking a cup of tea and being able to see the sacredness in all of it. And so that's what the book is intending to do, is to give moments that were big and monumental, like the birth of my children, to moments of just like walking through the city and looking at the roses. And it's written in a way that there's enough description that the reader can drop into the scene, but a lot of the meat of the chapters are the wisdom moments. So it's attempting to give you the experience of my brain as well, and how I kind of go in and out of the tactile, physical, and then all of a sudden my thoughts will like travel to something very metaphysical, or wisdom will drop down, or something else will come through. And so each chapter holds a moment in time with enough detail of a story that you can build out the scene. It's then filled in with the wisdom. And my hope as the author is that at the end of each chapter, the reader will pause and reflect and say, oh, that's so interesting. I remember a moment like that in my life. And I remember just sitting down and actually taking a moment to have a cup of coffee, or to listen to the birds, or just slow things down. And so each chapter is an invitation, a portal, for you as the reader to go into, to then come out of with your own questions, reflections, and connections.
One thing I noticed when I was looking at the cover of the book was the artwork
Yeah.
on the cover. And I was just curious about how intentional the artwork is on the
Mhm.
cover, and if that's representative of something, because it really stood out to me.
Yeah, so that's my original artwork. So in one of the chapters, I talk about living in Washington, D.C., and this moment of my life where I was moving to the West Coast. And I won't give too much away, but it was a big moment because I had had this whole life built out as an artist and as a yoga teacher, and I had this amazing community, great network of friends. And yet I was moving because I was following my now husband to Seattle. And in that chapter, there's a very short paragraph where I describe my painting practice at that time. And it was utilizing ink on what's called mylar to create these kind of organic images. But that particular image is created in a circle. And so there's enough structure in the painting so that you see it as a circle. But then there is kind of this like bleed out of the paint where you see not everything always fits in the exact shape that we want it to. But in that relationship, that synthesis of form and potential, expression, possibility, beautiful things come up. And so that's what I'm hoping people might subconsciously get when they look at the painting.
Yeah, definitely. That's the vibration of the image, I feel. And it's interesting as you were talking about it, I'm kind of holding the image in my mind.
Mhm.
Have you seen the movie? I believe it's called Signals with Amy Adams.
Arrival.
Arrival,
Yeah.
yeah.
You know,
The
it's
communication between, yeah.
so funny, or not. Synchronicities happen all the time. I actually don't think anything is a coincidence anymore. So when I say something's funny, I don't actually mean I think it's comical. I mean, I'm tuning into a synchronicity that's happening. So those images were created before that movie came out, which I think is really interesting. It's like one of my favorite movies. And what I think is really curious is that my sister-in-law brought that to my attention like after I had published the book, and I was like, "Oh my God, like I did not see that connection, and now I can't not see it." But I feel very confident that I made that painting before the movie even existed. And so there wasn't a reference, but I find it very curious that visually speaking, it does reference that movie. That movie comes up a lot as well. I have a client who is connected to that movie in a very specific way. And I was just talking with that client this week about the movie, and we haven't talked about aliens, but I believe in interdimensional beings. And so that movie was highly impactful for me when it came out. And so it's interesting to hear you now bring it back up as well.
Yeah. I I agree that nothing is a coincidence and everything
Mhm,
is
mhm,
aligned and where it should be at whatever point in time that we're
mhm.
in. And if people haven't watched that movie, it's a really good one to watch, and there's a lot of truth in it.
A lot of quantum truth comes through. What I
Mhm.
learned recently is that the person who wrote that movie is deep into the exploration of quantum reality. And so there's like intentionally that was woven into the movie.
So Can you tell people about some of the stuff you're doing currently in terms of facilitating events or doing group things?
Well, right now, my hobby business, This Gentle Way, has really stepped into kind of more of a full-time business. I also homeschool my kids and we do alternative education. So it's this beautiful kind of puzzle piece matrix of life. But my business, This Gentle Way, is focused on creating sacred spaces for people to have these types of conversations: quantum dialogue and meditation, astrology, intuition. And what I'm coming back into is offering in-person gatherings, and we have seasonal gatherings at the spring equinox, summer solstice, fall equinox, and winter solstice. Those are in-person gatherings. I'm also doing more of the workshop space again, where I am gathering people together to talk about True Sky Astrology, to guide meditation. But a lot of my business is still focused on that one-on-one work, and it's held in a membership container. And I mentioned earlier that it's really important to me to not just do the one-off, because the integration and the embodiment takes time. And as someone who has been on this spiritual journey, arguably for my whole life, but very much since 2012, I still am figuring things out. And there's no destination. Everything will continue to unfold and evolve. A lot of the best teachers that I hear will repeat this phrase of, the more we know, the more we don't know. And so to work with a guide or a mentor who can hold that curiosity and help you move through those deeper questions and moments of evolution is really important to me. So that's a lot of my base core work that I do one-on-one. But the workshops in the Indianapolis area are picking up. The seasonal gatherings are definitely an anchor point of bringing people together in sacred circle and gathering in community, just to connect to the land, to connect to the elemental energies, to connect to like-minded people. And in 2026 and onward, I'm going to be really focusing on that real world, in real time, in person stuff. I also have some really cool projects happening behind the scenes that I can't really speak to yet, but I'll be hopefully launching those in 2027. So the creative in me always has the ideas percolating. It also is because my North Node is in Aries, and so that's ideation. So I feel very aligned and inspired when I have a lot of ideas going.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people now also are craving that one-on-one and that super intentional connection.
Mhm.
So are the majority of your astrology clients virtual?
So I have clients globally at this point. Most are US based, but we're across the whole continent. And I will pretty exclusively meet online. One, for scheduling; two, for if we're in different states, we can still meet. But there's a third part of it that I think is really important to talk about. I went online because of COVID and the pandemic, and I probably wouldn't have anticipated taking my business online because I was very brick and mortar yoga studio focused. But the shift allowed me to see, to feel, and to experience with clients that when you're doing this deep energetic work, and when you're doing this embodiment work, to be able to talk to your guide in a place where you feel safe actually allows the work to be more impactful. So I talk to people on Zoom, but they get to be at their altar or in their bed or sitting on their porch or doing whatever it is that helps to regulate their nervous system, so that as we're having these bigger conversations, they don't have to worry about driving or getting somewhere or doing something. They actually get to be able to receive the hour-long dialogue with the meditation and all the information. And then they get to sit in their safe and sacred space and have a few more minutes of integration post session. And so the virtual aspect, while I would have never anticipated it being so powerful, has presented this whole experience of safe and sacred space on both sides of the screen, so that the shared nervous system space feels more aligned.
Yeah. So if anyone watching is curious about astrology or wanting to transition into True Sky, or just, it sounds like what you described, yes, you're an astrologer, but you do have that spiritual guide vibe to you. You're looking at it from different angles and supporting people in different ways. And I think that is beautiful. So everything's going to be linked down in the show notes, all of her information to connect with her. I'll put a link to her book down there. So if you want to connect with Tori, it's easy access. And do you have any reflections or things that you feel like maybe you would like to share, or anything that might want to come through as far as being channeled? What feels good right now?
You know, it's interesting that you asked that because right when you were closing out and saying it's like if you want to work on astrology, yes, that's what we do. But so much with my long-term clients becomes this like quantum dialogue where I'm pulling through information for them. And what we hold out at the end of every session is like 10 to 15 minutes where we go into a meditation and I start to tune into the field, the shared field of consciousness, and I'm pulling information through, again, not from my like egoic personal perspective or opinion, the information that's just dropping in. And if you listen to anything from like the telepathy tapes or other people who talk about this, if you have honed the gift, you basically have like a screen that you see. And on my screen, I get like spirit guide, animal information, usually a message, and usually then something from the ancestral realm, which could be past lives or direct ancestors. And that becomes really potent and really powerful. And I think that we, in our human brains, where we like to catalog things, we can say, like, we have a meditation teacher, I have a personal trainer, I have an astrologer, I have a this. A lot of where I see this going is the integrative approach, where we normalize all of it, where it's not super weird that you're talking to someone who's like pulling through information from your ancestors. We actually return to a place where that is normal and beneficial and something that we use as information because we have historical data that says we've done this, as we talked about earlier. We've done this for thousands of years. We've just kind of forgotten in the past 100 years. And so I would say, kind of as the final takeaway, is that this isn't just about finding the points on a birth chart and being specifically data driven. The data is helpful, but it's also about opening to receive the more multi-dimensional truth of our reality. And when we can do that, life is really magical and amazing and beautiful. And we get to see that there's so much potential. And that is what people need to remember right now at this time on the planet.
I love that you brought that up. Just, there's magic out there, and there's beautiful things out there, and there's ways to connect out there. And as you're saying that, I wanted to close out by saying that's a very Pisces moon reflection for you
My
to have.
heaven is up there too. My Venus is all up in that space. So
There you go.
it's a part of my core code. Yes, thank you for that reflection, but that's very true.
Awesome.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here today. And for those of you watching, thanks for tuning in. And I'll see you on the next Transformative Talks. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to follow us on all of our social media platforms so you never miss a new episode. If you're a holistic or wellness provider or someone with a healing journey you feel called to share, we'd love to connect. Visit www.tjtbodywork.com to reach out. And please make sure to join us for the next episode of Transformative Talks.